World War One. Let's get the slideshow going. This is a quick lecture on how we ended up in World War One. To start with, let's take a big picture and look at American foreign policy from the 1890s up through World War II. And what's interesting is we kind of veer back and forth from isolationism to interventionism. Obviously in 1890 to 1914, we start, and that's a very interventionist period, and that's what we've just been covering for the last few weeks. So you should be able to identify the various countries and events involved with what our foreign policy was in those years, and throughout all of it we're very interventionist. But then World War I starts, and we actually at the very beginning try to stay out of it. And the first part of this lecture is explaining, if we were so interventionist for those 25 years before the war, why did we turn to isolationism when the war started? In the later years of the war, that's going to switch, and in 1918 we are going to join the war, and we are going to be almost schizophrenic, like I've said before. We go from not wanting to be in the war at all to going 100% enthusiastically into it, and all out. Kind of like a kid's like, I don't want to dance, I don't want to dance, I don't want to dance, and then gets out on the dance floor and just goes nuts. And then strangely following the war, we go back into a strong period of isolationism in the 20s, and that extends into the 30s. And as Europe and Japan threaten more and more aggressively with war, we refuse to engage and get involved. Then, of course, in December of 1941, we get attacked, and similar to World War I, we go all in, and in a much longer struggle for us, we win World War II. And World War II is going to signify the breaking point. At that point, we're going to stop this pattern of isolationism, and we're going to recognize or conclude that isolationism doesn't work, and we are a major world power now, and if we stay out, the world just erupts in chaos. It had done it twice, World War I, World War II. And so World War II becomes the most important foreign policy event of the century, and one of the most important in our history, because it marks a break. From then on, we stay engaged in the world, and for the next 70 years, to the point where you are now, we remain the dominant force in the world, although now we are seriously questioning that role. That slide itself, if you can understand that, represents the main theme of American foreign policy since the 1890s. And obviously, like if you think about the presidential election today, the issue of America's role in the world is huge. And what you should understand, like I'm not telling you which way to think about it, but you should understand that it is an issue that has been argued about for 100 years now. All right, on to World War I. Just to kind of bring you back up to speed and remind you of Global 10, World War I starts when there are troubles between Serbia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, related to Bosnia and other things, and the Archduke Franz Ferdinand is visiting Sarajevo, which has been annexed and is part of the empire. There are a lot of Serbs that live there. They don't like that, and so Gavrilo Princip assassinates the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That sets off a chain reaction of many events, and eventually the start of World War I. You get the Central Powers, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire against two democracies, Great Britain and France, and the Russian Empire. And various other countries join in at certain points in time. But it is primarily seen as a war between Great Britain and France and Germany on the Western Front, and Russia and Germany on the Eastern Front. Here are the questions from that are central to American history for World War I. Obviously, World War I is a global topic and most appropriately studied from that perspective, but it has a big impact in America, and so here are the questions. At the beginning of the war, like I said, we were very isolationist, and you should understand why. If we're so isolationist, why do we switch? So it takes 3 years, but by 1917 we have switched and we enter the war. And then, not part of this lecture, but I'll tackle in class, the war has a huge effect at home. And there are at least 4 ways that the war affects us at home. You should understand those. And then finally, how does the war affect U.S. foreign policy after the war? FP being foreign policy. Here's a timeline just to get you started. The war starts in August 1914. In fact, there's a famous book about the beginning of the war called The Guns of August. About a year into the war, a British passenger ship called the Lusitania gets attacked and sunk. That is not the reason the U.S. enters the war, but it is a factor. A year later, the Germans make a pledge not to attack any more passenger ships crossing the Atlantic. That's the Sussex Pledge. A year after that, they take back the pledge. And a pledge being a promise. A month after that, a secret telegram from Germany to Mexico gets made public. And a month after that, we declare war on Germany. The Zimmerman telegram is going to be the final straw that breaks the camel's back. And if you remember, we've talked about this in relation to previous wars. It's part of the chain of events that leads to us entering the war. It's not really the cause of us entering the war. The cause is the deeper underlying reasons we went into conflict with Germany when we had been neutral. So that is the timeline. Let's start with the first central question. Why are we so isolationist in 1914? I don't have this written on the slide, so you're just going to have to kind of listen and then take that down. Number one, that's the normal situation. Europe had had wars throughout the 1800s, from the Napoleonic Wars to the Crimean War to the Franco-Prussian War. Just every 10 or 20 years they've got a major continental war going on. We tried to stay out as much as possible. We kind of got sucked into the whole French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars a little bit, but we never actually sent troops or anything. So while we had become interventionist in Latin America and had become interventionist a little bit in Asia with the Philippines and our open door policy with China, for us, those were our areas that we were interested in. We weren't interested in Europe. So this is not a switch for us so much as a continuation of the same old policy. So I have 3, that's the main thinking, but there are 3 really specific reasons why we were so isolationist. Number one, this is seen as Europe's war. No reason for us to get involved. So that's kind of what I just explained. Number two, in 1914, America is a much different country than it had been in the 1800s. Population-wise, demographically, we have immigrant groups that had come over either in the first wave in the 1840s and 50s or in the second wave that were for either side. So there is a fair amount of pro-British sentiment and pro-French sentiment. But there were a lot of immigrant groups who would have been pro the Central Powers. We had a sizable German population that would have been very pro the German side. We had a sizable Irish immigrant population that was very anti-British. The British had been horrible to them, and so they sided with the Central Powers. So that's a second reason. There were kind of mixed sentiment throughout the country for both sides, and neither side was seen as the good side, at least at the beginning of the war. The third reason we were isolationists is we did have some pull for the British and the French because they were the democratic countries, and we felt some identification with them. So that's just another example of how it's kind of support is mixed on both sides. I'll just add, at the beginning of the war, Wilson issues a proclamation of neutrality, that we must be neutral in thought and deed. I'm sorry, there's really a separate reason. Economically, we had no wish to get involved in the war. We were happy to trade with both sides. Sorry, that's a reason I should have put on the last slide. In 1916, Wilson campaigns for re-election, and his slogan is, "He kept us out of war." So staying out of the war is seen as the sensible move for the United States. But over the course of 1914 and 1917, we reluctantly switch our position, and then we declare war on Germany. There's really one issue that stands out why we ended up siding on the Allied power side, and that is freedom of the seas. Both sides, the British and the German sides, tried to stop our shipping and trading with the enemy, but it caused war with Germany, not with Britain and France, because Great Britain ruled the surface of the seas, and Germany kind of lost that naval battle at the beginning of the war and turned to the development of a new weapon, which was Unterseeboats. That is literally what they were called, and as we came to know them, U-boats, under the sea boats. And that meant more of a threat to us than the British shipping did. I'll explain. Great Britain had ships because they had established naval dominance for a long time ago. There had been a naval arms race, building the bigger ships before the war, but Great Britain had won that and had control of the surface of the seas. So Germany developed subs instead. The U.S. role was we were trying to trade with both countries, and the German subs would try to stop our ships from trading with Britain, and the British ships would stop our trading with Germany. Conflict with Germany developed because a ship can stop another ship and prevent it from continuing on without actually sinking it. But a submarine is actually a stealthy weapon or vessel, and its only real defense is you don't know where it is. If they were to surface and show themselves, they can actually be easily blown out of the water, especially those early first generation of subs. So here's the New York Times headline from May of 1915. Lusitania is sunk by a submarine, probably 1,000 dead, twice torpedoed off the Irish coast, sinks in 15 minutes. Americans aboard included Vanderbilt and Frohman. Washington believes that a grave crisis is at hand. So in May 1915, the Germans sink a passenger ship, and you can see it's huge. It looks like the Titanic or something, that was traveling from New York City to England, and they sunk it as it was approaching England near the Irish coast. It's considered one of the most barbaric acts that anybody could remember, to just kill all those innocent passengers. The actual issue is more complicated than that. I'm at 14 minutes. We're going to go a little over 15, but that's okay, you don't mind. So here's some interesting facts that you may or may not remember from before. It's not an American ship, it's a British ship. It's a passenger ship, but it was secretly carrying ammunition and weaponry in the cargo hold of the ship. The passengers didn't know that, but the various governments, the British, the American, and the German governments knew that. What's the American interest? Like, why is it such a deal for us? Well, there are a lot of American passengers on board, and it was the American government selling that weaponry to the British. Why is it such a big deal? Well, I mean, obviously, it's over 1,000 dead. But here's another complicating factor. the German government had put this notice into the newspapers before the ship traveled. Travelers intending to embark on the Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and her allies, and Great Britain and her allies. The zone of war includes the waters adjacent to the British Isles. That in accordance with formal notice given by the Imperial German government, vessels flying the flag of Great Britain or any of her allies are liable to destruction in those waters. Travelers sailing in the war zone on ships of Great Britain or her allies do so at their own risk. So, it's not so, I mean, it's still barbaric, but it's not so obviously just Germany's fault. This ship is going into a war zone. They had warned the Americans that they were going to be attacking those ships. If you took a plane and flew directly into Syria, who's foolish? The people that fire upon you, or you for flying that plane into a war zone? So the Germans felt like this is where the war is going to be won or lost, is can Britain get supplies from America? And so they're going to try and stop that. The shock effect, the number of civilians killed, the fact that it is an attack on civilians, has a massive effect. It feels to America and the world like we've entered some kind of new zone where soldiers don't just fight soldiers now. Now they're attacking peaceful ships. And so Germany gets kind of a new reputation. A little bit barbaric, a lot barbaric, and it seemed unprovoked. I put a question mark there because obviously it wasn't totally. So kind of like Germany gets the blame for World War I generally, Germany gets the blame for the Lusitania attack, and they deserve most of it. But as with the war, which was the start of, was much more complicated than Germany just being greedy, the Lusitania is more complicated. So here we are. The Lusitania gets attacked, and again, I'll just emphasize, the U.S. didn't enter the war because of that attack. There's another attack a year later. The Germans sink a British ship called the Sussex, and there's a second reaction about that, and Germany doesn't want America to enter the war, and so they make a promise or a pledge. They will not attack passenger ships crossing the Atlantic without warning them first. The war goes on. It's now in its third year. It has turned into the bloodiest war the world has ever seen by far, not even close. And all the countries are starting to run out of gas. And by gas, I mean young men to fight the war and the industrial might to make war. And Germany thinks it is on the verge of winning, but they've got to stop Britain from being rearmed and resupplied by America. And so they take a gamble. They decide that they will engage in what is known as unrestricted submarine warfare. No limits. They're going to attack, and they're not going to give any warnings. So in February of 1917, a year after the Sussex Pledge, almost, they take it back. And they are hoping that they can win the war before America can enter and have it make its presence felt. And that's their gamble. They come fairly close to doing it. It's not a totally ridiculous idea. So I went through all of that. What is the Sussex Pledge? Why was it made? Why was it renounced? And then the final straw is the Zimmermann telegram. It was a telegram from Germany to Mexico, and you can read it there, saying that making an offer to Mexico that if they would assist Germany in attacks on America, that they would help Mexico, Germany would help Mexico get some of its land back that had been taken in the 1800s. And in it, it kind of admits that they expect America to declare war on Germany at some point soon. And when that gets made public, the British actually intercepted it and were the ones that make it public because they wanted us to enter the war. That's the final straw, and America's going to declare war on Germany. And there's a kind of semi-racist cartoon at the time showing what the deal is about. And from there, that was March of 1917, and then in April of 1917, America declares war on Germany, and we enter World War I. Tomorrow in class, on Monday in class, I will go through the effect of the war on the home front. Thanks, guys. It's a great lecture.